are talking running and fast walking. And because we see a lot of women here and we know that it is really fun in Southern California and it's therapeutic to go walk or run by the beach. So if this is something that you do for exercise, but maybe a nagging knee or hip issue is stopping you from doing that, we have three common culprits of those problems from happening and what you can do about it. So if you are a runner or a fast walker, comment below. Let us know which one you prefer. Because for myself, I love running and I do it for a stress relieving reason. I know it just feels good for the endorphin release, and they say the runner's high, but there's something about just being out in nature and just being able to keep going and listening to music or listening to a podcast and just clear your head, if anything else, from what you're doing. And being by the beach is even better. But I know for myself, when I have dealt with some hip issues, it was back before I was PT. So there were things happening that I wish I would have known now. And so that's why I'm here to share. This is super common, and the women that we see from all different walks of life, and that's why I say walking for exercise or running. They're both go hand in hand because these symptoms can be common in both. And the first one that I'm going to talk about, if you are getting chronic knee pain and it's not going away, sometimes it may be due to having muscle tightness around your knee. And when we talk about muscle tightness, sometimes we think of just doing, I'm going to actually stand up and show you. We think of just doing like a quad stretch and stretching those muscles. Oh, maybe it's my quad here, maybe it's my hamstring, and that's why my knee hurts. Well, it might actually be your calf muscles. And this happened to a recent client of mine who just couldn't figure out for years and years why she couldn't jump rope or she couldn't run because her knee kept bothering her. So what we actually did is we looked at her ankle mobility and we looked at the muscles from her feet all the way up the chain to her hips. And it turns out her calf on that right side where she was having knee pain was just so tight that the calf muscle actually attaches to the back of your knee. And so when it's pulling in a different force and you're having to bear weight through that leg when you're running and push off that toe, your calf really has to work a lot with your hamstrings. And so hers was just so tight, it couldn't, when your muscle is so tight, it actually can't generate that force to help you. And therefore, it's going to put a lot of strain on the front of the knee. So we worked on a lot of calf stretching exercises, ankle mobility exercises, and stretching from the back part of her body. And she was finally able to jump rope and run without pain in her knee. So that's number one culprit. How do you stretch your calves? Well, there's different ways. You can actually stand at the edge of a step, drop your heels, and get a great stretch that way. And you want to hold stretches for at least 30 seconds to a minute. So that's one way we worked on stretching it. She also got one of those awesome little slant boards you can order. And she would stand there while she was making her coffee in the morning. So it just became part of her day and a ritual that she was doing. So number one would be your calves or your hamstrings are really tight. The next one is due to what people call their IT band, or my IT band's tight. What does that mean? And what is your IT band? So your IT band cannot be tight. It's actually a band of tissue. It's like fascia. So it goes from your muscles right here on the side of your hip, and it's like a band of tissue down to the side of your knee here. And you actually have muscles underneath there, and that band of tissue is kind of like rubs against there. So when people think their IT band is tight, it's just irritated. And it may feel, some people may talk about foam rolling their IT band or rolling to be able to release it. Well, it actually comes from higher up. So if you work on some hip stretching exercises, where that IT band actually inserts and attaches there at the top, then that will affect the tissue all the way down. So if you're getting knee pain or you're getting hip pain and you have a lot of tenderness, if you touch the sides of your thighs and it's super painful and tense on the side, that is your IT band. But you want to go to the hip first. Go higher up and working on some stretching exercises to help it. So the first one I would do would be crossing that ankle over your knee. It's like a good figure 4 stretch is what we call it. And you're grabbing behind that leg and you're pulling in to get a good stretch right in that glute area and through your hip muscles there. So working on that a few times a day, holding it for at least 30 seconds to a minute, that would be a great one. Now the last one is people complain of having hip pain with running. And so why would that happen? It could be these 2 other issues that we already talked about, or it could be that that muscle is actually very weak and it doesn't know how to support your whole pelvis. So if you're running or you're fast walking, you're having to switch from one side to the other, and it's almost like you're a single leg balance on each side. But your pelvis, right here, your hips, they have to be able to absorb that shock every time you go from one leg to the other. But if one side is really weak, it's actually going to not support that leg like the other side. So if you're on our email list, you got a test that is a video from me. And if you're not on your email list, put your name below and I will add you to it, because this test will show whether or not your hips can actually handle a running motion or even fast walking. So if you can't bear weight on one side versus the other, it's going to transmit that force all the way up to your hip, and your hip is going to start getting irritated and angry. And sometimes we call it hip bursitis. It's a bursa is like a fluid-filled sac, and it's protects your joint, and your muscles go over it. And if that bursa is irritated and inflamed, it's actually going to cause a lot of pain right in the side of your hip. I had it when I was in college, and it was very uncomfortable. If you're sitting for a long period of time and you go to get up, sometimes it's like a burning pain. It's really hard to sleep and put pressure on that side. So it turns out that if you work on calming it down a little bit first, and that's what we help people with in a PT session, but being able to calm it down and teach you the right stretches and strengthening exercises. So it could mean that your hip is really weak on one side. So every time you go to put force on it, it's not able to absorb that pressure, and the bursa is going to get inflamed and irritated, if that makes sense. So 3 common culprits of having hip and knee pain, and this is for anyone that does any running or fast walking. So I'm going to summarize that again. You're doing the right stretches. Maybe it's your calves, maybe it's your hamstrings. Number 2, it could be that your IT band is irritated because your hip is really tight. And number 3, your hip could be really weak, and that's going to transmit force from your hip all the way down to your knee. So you may get knee pain with that, or you may get hip pain with that. So it's not always the knee, but you have to go above and below the joints, and it's not always your hip. It could be actually something from your knee. So I hope you learned something.